Setting ground lines and arrows, lines of indications and flux. Process lines that indicate line calc and modify. Directing lines at 8 line centers, line sequence, line condition, and convert the system of the travel. Process communications working all together, communication. Signifies high lines, set calculations, screen location, adaptations of flux. It's all set lines of travel, right? Set lines in A tracks, A position lines over B. The more you come into configuration in line centers, voicing patterns, process calculate screen locations, adds formula and communicates lines in travels. Direct lines at A center, travels lines at B over C, process lines at D over X, X lines at 1 over flux. Travel point lines of graph, interforce line communication convergence. On sequence, on panel, track communication lines convergence set and lines of calculations. Inside lines, routers and routers, line conditions at the convergence system, forward line signal location setting calculations. Inside travel, right? Calculate inside lines, high start line conditions settings. All you guys have to identify is how to get in your portals through stargates and create it through a gate. Stargate, star portals, star mechanism portals. Star mechanism lines of travels have communication lines of portals. Star communication screen lines adaptations, star lines, screen lines adaptations of portals. Everything you get in position of, the connection with your higher self, your avatar, your sim, where you are in frequencies of your symbiote or located setting and that position interactions, has to go through a portal, has to go through a stargate. So that puts them in the balance where they're going in that positions. Direct lines of sight, direct lines of panel, direct lines of operation, lines of sequence. Because you have to understand the structural line division. Now we modified the settings location of sequence. For you guys to understand these things, it's 6 lines of setting. It's getting 3 lines of wires and 3 integration lines of communication that's ground sentence and sequence. All in positions working all together, right? All in subtractions. Now, if I change the flux at a different angle, are they all still there? Yes. So the more you go higher in the mind, the more you get in structure. And they all got to be there. And they're telling you exactly, bring it back to fail-safe, that's 144. All in sequence, all in balance, all in set tractions. So if I add a clocking here, and a clocking over here, and 3 clocking locations, it's setting attractions, right? Directing grounds, circulation lines, all communication convergence system going in the same directions, not in opposite line communications. So it looks like I'm going backwards, but I'm not. Direct and redirect is going forward, is a constant continuous force. They're throwing an internal and external force. Now, if I put it back to fail-safe, is it back in sequence, back in balance, back in operation? Yes, because my mind is controlling everything I bring in. Position location perceives everything of conscious and set design. Okay? So add that equation lines of 3, set position of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, they're all going together, right? But as they go processing, direct and redirect and setting. 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 Okay, direct and redirect and setting. Okay, that's what you have to stand to frequency and grounds. That's 144 flux, right? Bring it back to the fail-safe in order of chronological setting travel. Okay, set positions. But see how they rotate? And the same clocking screen, adaptation of systems, all through travel. Mind controlling lines and operation lines and sequence lines of panel. Now, this is direct, and this is where redirect. This is where you guys are. That's where you are. You have to come into this now, higher frequency line grants. Because you're coming to new sun code, a new moon line, rotation lines of setting, their travel. But they all work together, right? Okay. Now let's override the panels. Process lines of indication setting for you guys to identify your 6 habitations of your suns and 6 habitations and set lines of travel. So the process lines of 12 lines send a location classification where you guys left off in your consciousness. Directing lines of grounds on line 3, on line 4, and line communication and convergence system position of 4 suns. 4 suns, guys, going in the same direction, direct and redirect, right? So as you're going direct, redirect, 2 arrows and 1 line indication. Not 2 arrows in line position of 2 lines of flux. That's a separation, okay? So you have to get out of this, and this is going to process you in a higher fast track communication to get into 144. And there's an entry point. Once you guys get to 144, okay, now the team's into 244. They got to get into 344. They got to get into 444 and stay there. And once you get in that positions and setting, that's why I want you guys to constantly keep putting up jump scars. That keeps you track where you are in conversions of position lines of settings. Okay, so 234, 344, 444, right? Working all together, right? Back in setting, back in balance, back in convergence, back in set tractions, right? So 144 is the foundations. 244 is offsetting, which is outline setting, uniting outer space locations. This is inner space to track communication, directing signals. Cross lines and position lines 244. 244 line screen adaptation lines through pi. There's a solar sail. Travels point lines of graph, directing lines and link. Set course centers, line communication line, position another platform, line condition other platforms. Got 4 lines of platforms and travel of communication. Directing lines at grounds and on lines sequence. Platforms are 144. Travel lines, walking line screen, adaptation line, position location of 444 and tractions. Directing lines at grounds. Set course centers, XT1000 comes in, platform. Sees where you guys left off in your game. Simulation 1, Simulation 2, Docking 3, or Launch Pad of 4. Sets lines of travel, directing lines link, process of communication. Now, anything above 44, okay, you're in 544, which is a locking screen to a square root that box your system lines of settings. So now that's the new extra entry point that you stay in position. So you no longer will be at 144 or 244 in that position, but your 144 is your foundation system, which is your gateway and travel of communication. That's all you have to identify, okay, is the foundation itself, all right? So it's very important to understand these things, because understanding that positions, understanding what's going on in that lines of communication and settings all through travel, as it goes in the same rotation as that travel communications. All right, so you guys are coming to the next level now because you're coming at 344. So every time you go higher, you're creating more frequency. So you're going so as you go higher, you're creating the structure. Now you can create it through carbon. You can create it through silicone because you're past the 144. You create it through anti-mantle. You can create it line communication lines and high position lines that calculate screen locations. You create, calculate, modify lines of crystalline, coarse-landed calculation lines, anti-carrying, direct line, community, alter, skelter, and line screen adaptations of flex. You can do whatever you want, tractions. Okay, but you have to identify the correlation lines and communication lines of balance. Okay, when it comes to 144 and above, right? Because you're changing your clocking system. So I just want to make that constantly well aware of what you're doing in position as you're bringing in the sun and creating a set position. Yin and yang. See, it rotates, goes itself, right? One spot here, travel, right? 6 and 9. See how it goes together, right? And it's more fun when you add color to it, right? You add color to it. You see the colorations coming in line, communication lines, convergence lines of the travel. Then you see all the red, right? That overrides the system of black and white, which is snowy graph appearance. Now, the more you come in that position, you come in green. Inside lines, inside travels, inside lines, inside travels, inside lines, inside travels. Set position red over green line communications in a convergent system and travel. Okay? So everything's rotating all at once. The circulation, the settings, the operation line positions, all those calculations set of yin and yang. So they're always inseparable, nothing separated. So that's what you have to come into is a higher levels of indication lines of arrows. Stop putting yourself in separation settings, process the system lines of travel. Let's get a direct line link, modify grounds, holographic gridding, inside rotation. Okay, so this is what you guys are right now. Okay, that's where you are. Now you have to come into this, direct and redirect in the same arrow. Get out of this and come into that, see? But they all work together, right? Because they know where they are in travel. Now, the reason why you guys understand these things, because you come into your polarities and position how you see the projection of all lines projecting. It's this, it's not that. It's not this. It's set lines of traction. That's confusing lines of anomaly, especially with your sun and your moon. It's this in set position that puts everything lines of communication, how you come to your eye-line sequence and lines of travel. They all rotate all together locations. All right, so it's a better understanding how to see that line signals that put you in position lines of travel. Now, once you understand the A course, directing lines indicates here, indicate here, indicate here, indicate here, indicate here, and indicate here through arrows, right? Not this. It's too confusing to do this in set lines of travel. Okay, longitude, latitude. It's too confusing for the sun, especially in the tractions that you guys are coming to conversions of. So direct one line link, process lines that indicate lines of flux over screen. The operates line connection setting, pixelation of one plane, directing lines of 2 over track communication and quantum interference. Not this interactions. Okay? Not this, right? But they all work together, see? I've just shown how it all works in set tractions. Okay? So it's important to understand what you're doing in convergence. As your mind adapting more to the mind imagination lines to its system to course of recourse. So everything's direct and redirect, right? So understanding that line communication setting, you understand a 4-line sequence, 3 centers to measure, 3 sent lines at high center locations, 3, 4. Sets travels in 4 lines of 6 lines, a triangulation over lines, boxing frame. Triangulation of question over mark, Fibonacci line, Y screens. Now you can do anything in line communication with convergent system all through travel, but everything has to be traveling. See how it moves by itself? Right, so what is it doing? Direct and redirect, right? Direct and redirect. Okay, direct and redirect, that's what it's doing. As soon as I touch it, it's moving by itself. So everything moves by itself. The mind moves by itself. The imagination moves by itself because it's operating of itself. And that's what you're seeing. But if you're seeing this, you're separated right away. Because there's no transit. You're setting 2 transits of setting, one in set position of space and one set position of ground. That's not what is interactions, guys. It's a direct line link in communication to a system all through setting a value. That's what is in travel, right? Now you got that, right? But now you have to convert this system of center lines, process indicates lines, no separation of yin and yang, just one signal in locations, interactions, and direction, like this. Okay? No more separation. Your minds are more in lines of setting. The more you lock your mind line, screen adaptation, imagination, and its recourse puts all communication into convergence, how you see it through a cerebral. Mystical cortex operates line signal, location setting, this convergent system, all through attractions. So that's a calculation. Travels line, directing lines of grounds. Now, structure lines, set in position, 3 centers of measure. Properties over line screen. See it all comes together? Okay? It doesn't separate like this. It's that. So that's what you have to indicate. And when you do that, it's much easier to do the design, and it's created through schematics over lines of screen adaptations over cross line communication lines of pi. Puts everything all together, travel communications, right? So that's what you guys have to come into, direct and redirect in one setting, in one track communication, in one line. Okay, flux over setting, flux over travel, flux over communications. There's your teleportation vessel. Travel through it, right? And you inside. Okay. And you got your platforms. Now you're traveling through that set positions, all through setting. Okay? Then you got your energetic dome. Then you got your sight line centers. And you got line communication, interference, communication of systems. All through travel, all through mechanism. All right, so once we get in that incarnation system, then we get into the line conditions of 6 habitation zones and 6 inhabitations, which is the inner space and outer space. Inner space and outer space. Let's bring in the line center location 6. Line conditions of inner space, inner spectrum, inner light. Outer space, outer realm, outer calculation. Out of sync, out of norm. In norm, out of norm. Outer link, line conditions, inner link, outer link. Inner space, outer space. Now directing lines of 6, cross lines of 6 lines of travel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, 6 suns, right? Then you have line condition setting and convergent system. Outline setting, line communication lines. So each sun is a direct line link that processes lines dimensional solar cell, has a flux communication with its convergent system, how the sun and the moon have to modify their own system, mutate their own settings to new lines and new levels of new value. The master system lines of travel, okay? So we got 6 line communications of truth. That's right, guys. Your 6 habitations are truth, all truth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The false are the operate line centers outline sequence. False, false, false. And that's where it starts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? 6 inhabitation, line condition setting, inhabitation. Right? So that's where it comes in truth and false. Truth lines connection to false, truth lines of false, truth lines of false, truth lines of false, in the same directions and same location with systems. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? So as they work together, they work through a collaboration system and sending lines of travel into energy light of communication. As they communicate to their system, they send up their graph lines and communication lines and sending through set calculation, their sun and their moon codes. Now, it's very complicated stuff how this is all set up, but you have to set travels in positional clocking lines, screen lines, because each clocking system has a different lines of sun and different line of moon, different line of galaxy, because they all work together, but their own individual system, but their own operation system. All right, so setting lines of sequence, Platitude division location offline. Now we're going to change line of communication in the current system, lines and set calculations. Now we come into that. Now what I'm doing is going through light shades, come into the sun moon, which is a half moon. Okay, that's a half moon, right? All right, and we do the opposite direction, which is direct and redirect. In one setting, one traction, one symbolism, one line of indication. Okay? So you have to understand how to coordinate the lines of the sun and the moon and create it through light shades and shadows and convergence system all through settings, all through its operation. All right? Okay, so this puts every line communication setting. This is the false line, cross lines of indication over cross lines, and indicates over lines of 3 lines of pi. Now the 3-line communication of the sun is rotating its rotor into light shades and shadows through snowy graph interference, setting up our communication system through an umbrella. So the sun and moon is trying to find the information system where you are in your convergence system, your patterns, behavior, process of indication, setting, of flux. All right, so that position lines the setting of truth through false. All right. So once you get in truth and false, they come truth, truth, false, 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 truth. They come in a long convergence setting of light shades and shadows and lines of coding. 1/10 of a frame into 90/10 of a frame, which is 100% of time frame. But your all lines and online sequence, it gets more confusing if you don't understand your light shades and shadows of which your sun is in direction in its location system. Okay? So once we get in that calculation modify, then we go in this line signals, then we go line position outline signal, and we process lines of 3 indicates lines of pi. Okay, go on the circuit lines of 24 lines of settings, process of communications and directions. 2 centers of calculation. All right? Okay, and we do the same thing again in false. False gets to know the calculation of the set light stations, locates of the sun and the moon, moon and the sun. Process of indication online. This is truth and false together, which is a solid line of communication. Okay? Solid line. So the sun has to come in its own carbon. It has to come in its own silicone. You understand? It has to come into its own crystal, into mantle. Okay? To its own anticarrier, to its own helter-skelter. And the only way we can identify that is a convergence system through truth and false narrative between the void and position of the sun itself. That puts everything all together in travel communications. So you go through 6 lines of setting and habitations. 6 lines of travel, direct lines, lines. Okay, 6 habitation line zones, transits over lines into biofields. Okay, so 6 lines of ground, calculates the ground location lines of tether, the 3 tracks, these communication lines converts the system all through calculations. Now, once you get into line signal, 3 line signals, then they cross their systems, creating their own skynets and grids, crossing line communication lines of high centers of travel that has a direct line link that processes their indication setting all calculation Wi-Fi. Very complicated through the sun and the moon, right? Because the sun and moon are separable. They're never separated. They're always together. So it's processing line position of direct and redirect in one line, one flux line, one screen, one adaptation, one line signal location setting to travel. Don't process communication lines and setting creating lines like communication lines of 2 lines because that separates position location where you're going through north, west, south, and east through degrees. Okay, so it's important to understand that because you have to understand how to go through cloud lines. Now, once you get in position lines, the position of the Skynet, it's in travel communications in all directions of flux. Very complicated, but it's a lot of fun, right? Now you go inside travel and rotation. Okay, now as you go inside line condition setting, the sun and moon has to understand the directions. Creating lines, solar system 1, inside outline rotations. That's 3 triangulation line communication presence and location of travel. Okay, inside rotate the cycles, line screen adaptations of flux. Okay, process line calculation, sun code line screens, 3 centers of measure, clocking lines at set position. Now, it's going to get more complicated now because you have to understand what the sun is doing through its galaxy alignments. Process lines of truth and false narrative, directing lines, light codes, metaphors, line communications, and side positions. The sun and the moon has to understand what it's doing through 1/10 of a frame or 20 lines of 10th of a frame. It's always line position. 50-50 is not percent locations of balance. 51/50 is a positions of balance. So there always have to be location. You can go light over dark, dark over light. But the process of communications is knowing exactly what you're doing through cloud change. You're changing your interacting location setting that you're modifying your system, how you see your sun and your moon through light shades and shadows. That puts all lines of all communication of convergence of balance. Very complicated stuff, but it's very important to understand this and how to use it through truth and false factors of communications, how you see the sun and the moon together. So you're here in system line connections, trying to understand what's going on in modification. That's you. Okay? Setting sequence lines of sun, over lines of signal, cross lines of sun and moon, truth lines of false, direct lines of 4 lines, set lines of 6 lines of communication. All in direction. All through the sun, all through the moon. So the sun and the moon, when they create their sky grids, they create their solar panels that indicates the sending of flux over line and the polarities. They communicate to high centers. Now, once they get out of snowy graph interference, they clock their system in color, which is light metaphor, pattern recognition, time recognition, line conditions, all levels, pixelation graph, hologram screens. Process indicates lines and indicate line position of flux over setting line communications. So if lines communications are red, over line sequence locations in black. It set lines as travels, and direct lines on the line communication. Okay, once they indicate that lines, cross lines angles, cross line communication lines positions. So this becomes false now, and this becomes truth. Okay, truth becomes false, false becomes true. So they go back and forth and tither, and they attach the system lines and calculation screen lines. The constellation lines of pathogens sets lines of 4 seconds over code over sequence over pi. That puts lines of over pi, that process of the sun that you're in the communications going forward. Under pi is a process of a pause. Underlying screen adaptations of pi is offline setting. Inside position lines attractions, right? So it's how you use your sun and you move through pi. That indicates lines of grounds, online sequence, process lines of 3 centers of measure. Creating a half moon and red lines of sequence and securing lines of communication. Okay? Colors lines of patterns, process indication lines. Now we get that set up. Now we're going to line of blue. Blue plasma lines correlates to calculation screen lines adaptation of its mind, imagination lines, of course. Red course lines, 2 travels and rotation surface and traffic communications in direction. Now once we have direction line signal line condition setting, the convergent system sets line course centers taken out of everything of snowy graph in pixelation graphs and communication lines of surface and travel. Inside rotation, inside tractions, in directions and location. Look at this in traffic communication. Very complicated stuff, all right? All right, so the 42 line connection setting, the X8000 comes in provision, windows of frame, windows of tractions, and mothership comes in automatically in line screen. It's got to see what you're doing in line connection. You understand your 6 habitations of your Earth, 6 line set locations of your setting location of your suns, set locations 6 inhabitation lines of your suns, and 6 location lines of your Earth and rotation. Traffic communications. Directing ground centers, mothership comes in, correlates the calculation line time frame, clocks its system and part line screen locations, and 4 set lines of sequence and panels of operation screen. Sets communication at ground centers, online sequence of panel, processing indicates the setting, all through galaxy alignments and clocking line communication. So it's very complicated how the sun and moon moves around the system in the solar system of itself. So I want you guys to modify these things because it's very important you get positions because you guys have a huge test coming up on Friday in sequence of the sun and the moon. Okay? Look at all this, the sun and moon. This is truth and factor and false of communication. Now, as it gets positioned out of snowy graph interference and have a confirmation of balance with each other, then they can mutate into anything they see in the equation lines, screen adaptation of cloud lines. But you have a direct line link that you have to modify, set position lines, measure, and scale. That process indicates line communicates to its portal through a stargate. That's right. Your moon is a stargate. It's a star portal. They're everything in there and modify their own system of their own operation system. So you have to truly understand how to see them through instructions because they already set up their alignments. But now they're in their own modification of their own set position of their new simulation. Now, online center, online sequence. Panels as operation screen lines. We have a new graph line. That course the channels of time frame. Change the graphing of its map lines of sequence and location across angles. Process indicates inside traffic communication of direct lines of windows. That's right. Each line sun line codes lines of signals. Graphing communication lines, high position lines of pixelation graph. Simulation lines and course centers the island communication lines of time frame. Sets course lines of time. Direct lines of all communication. Let's get 2 versions lines of signal, which is pink and lines of screen adaptation. Right? 3 windows and tractions, right? Now, where you override the pink line, the process lines pixelation over signal, line connection setting as CCTV. Satellites in rotation, 3 centers of traffic communication of convergence. Sending offline signals in rotational lines and grounds lines and high calculation setting. Now, I don't expect you to understand these things, but this is actually what the sun and moon does every single time you get in frequency. Now, you have a direct line link when you modify your mind. You don't bring in your sun, the sun's not there. That means the sun is on its own. So the sun's going to do everything until you understand how to use your mind properly through imagination system that recourses everything in directions of direct and redirect. Now you understand how to use the direct and redirect. Now you have to stand through degrees, because Earth is on line signals, and 98% lines of Earth through a thermometer and temperature reading location to the barometer. But you have to understand the position location of its survey that processes communication how you see it through landmass probing and detecting location setting to its orbs. Directing ground centers, how you calculate and modify. Your sun is lines of a solar planet. Okay? So what you have to start identify what the moon is through a beam, and what the sun is that set position to its system all through attractions. Now, once you come into a code configuration system, the pixelation grounds, the simulation ground communications change the conversion of light shades and shadows. Comes the line screen adaptation system. That's why you see the indication setting, all three reflection locations. So if you're modifying your system, and let's say your chakra system is in yellow, your sun and your moon beam is going through correlation lines into symbolism location of symbiotes. Process lines of symbolism, lines of attractions. So when you change a coloration of pattern in that positions, if you're happy in that position line calculation setting, your sun will turn yellow. Your chakras will turn yellow in that setting. That process indicates when you come into security line communication on the convergence system, location operates lines of travel. So it's all your pattern behavior. You change your pattern behavior, you see the indication what the sun looks like. If you get a position location setting, if you're darkened screen adaptation, you'll see the sun line communication coming into the clouds. So that indicates lines coming into thunder. That indicates lines of position location to a system. That process out communicates where it starts raining. You get into galaxy alignment communicates lines of gases and fumes. Directing lines of grounds into flux over line, acceleration line, communication line, convergence system, location line, connection at position location operation. You have to go through cloud hopping. Now it's timeline, time leap, time jumping. Sets communication lines of metric locations, process communication lines, electrical line communication high position lines of travel. Directing ground centers, online sequence, process communications, online center, online travel. Okay, sets lines of communications that into your sun in yellow. Okay, so your sun's yellow. It's online sequence, online panel. Process of indications, right? And you're looking at your sun. Sun's looking at you. So it sees you in an indication system. Change your pattern behavior, changes your mind lines of imagination. Right? So that indicates settings. Your whole body is now yellow. Okay? Until you understand the indication setting, your 12-line setting, and the sequence, location, or rainbow. So whatever you go through the mind adaptation and imagination, that's what your sun becomes. You angle the point lines of graph. You communicate the high center location, how you see it through truth, how you see it through false, and that line screen adaptation. But what changes is the power of intent. You change the power of intent. Now you're influencing the sun at a higher frequency. And you got to be cautious what you're doing that, because you're always bringing the alter ego. So either you're bringing the alter ego that's void, or you're bringing the alter ego not balancing your system through your light webbing and your dark webbing. So never get positional over lines of signal, location, setting until you understand the adaptation, how to use a formula equation, how you look at the proper suns and location inside lines of its chakras. So you change your chakras or change the time scale. Change the scale, change the time measure. Change the measure, change the balance. Change the balance, change the flywheel. Change the flywheel, change the fly communication setting and calculations. Sun's very complicated. Moon's very complicated when you travel through it. Okay? So that's an indication system that you change your pattern behavior. That's why the sun is yellow. Let's get an orange line. So orange is what? It separates from the chakra. What's the orange setting locations? It's attractions. Let's get in ground lines of 0. Okay. Coming in ground lines of set position. Coming in 2 lines of security. 3-line communication Fibonacci, right? Sets travels in point line graph. Yellow is the power generator. So now you're seeing yellow through the power generator of the sun. That process of the moon, how it sees through its beam. That reflects everything of its water, or anything of its air, or anything of its space of time and measure and scale. That indicates position of flux over set travel and communicates to its convergence. Setting direct lines of link, process that indicates the setting off attractions. Very complicated when you look at the sun and the moon at the same time. That's right, you're looking at the sun and the moon at the same time. You're not looking at the sun, you're looking at the sun and the moon. So either the moon is in the front line, or the moon's in the back line, or it's in the shape line. That's all it's in set position. But it's direct and redirect, not in separation of how you see lines of position, location, convergence system, all through direct line connection, setting, this operates lines of sequence. Okay, so in that line screen, what you're indicating the sun itself, the sun represents you in line condition setting to its convergence system all through travel. Process indicates line condition setting to its position. So if it goes orange, your line communication you're seeing the orange F created system. It's responding back to you in set lines of travel. Now your whole body is a convergence of orange, just orange itself, right? Your connection to your sun will not turn into its rainbow until you modify each chakra inside your system through an activation screen that processes your system through acceleration line connection setting and sets a convergent system all through channel operation. It's very, very complicated when you look at the sun, its attractions. So every time you change your behavior, you look at the sun, that's what you're indicating. Every time you change your pattern of behavior, you change the clouds. Every time you pattern of behavior, you change the moon, right? You don't bring in the sun, sun's not there. It's on its own operation, which you're not in control now. You're not in control until you understand how to mind control your thoughts, your actions, and emotions through levels of imagination. Using that through the consciousness, using that through the awareness, puts you in provision lines of balance, right? So it's very powerful how you come in that position lines of attractions. Complicated, isn't it? Right? So now you have to understand how the sun sees you in one direct line link. Not a process of separation, because that's confusing your anomalies, how you get into lines of interpretation through integrations. So it's important you understand how to use that in line connection setting. 3 signals in graph line, not 2 trap communications. So I'm positioned at 1, 2, and 3 centers at different angles. And you are here in set line communication in direction. Okay? Not this. Not that. That's a separation. Okay, so it's 3 lines, because if you look really close, you see the set location, 3 wires are indicated inside. 1 wire is signature, 3 clockings of wires. Clocking centers, line calculation and ground centers, lines of sync location setting, the position in red. This location is in blue, and line condition set of white. There's 3 wires of indications. All right, so this process communicates lines and position lines of attraction. Okay, through the sun and through the moon. But they work together in a correlations of balance with each other. That's how you see a half moon. So the half moon itself in red line setting is a security line. So it could be a security breach, security panel, check line communicates where the sun is and converts the system. 12 settings, lines of calculations, directing lines over 1, processing over 2, and line screen adaptations of unification. Indicate grounds, online sequence, online panels, travel communications, and setting. Okay, so we go through code fragmentations, ground centers, and sequence. The sun rotates its setting of seconds, minutes, hours, and frames, guys. But it's never in your provision until you bring in your mind imagination. But how you bring in your mind is how you use it through intent. Okay, so the sun is constantly moving everywhere until you bring your mind imagination. If you're not seeing the sun, okay, it's in its own clouds. So if it's in its own clouds, it's traveling through its own mechanism line position. So it's in track locations. All right, so the sun coming here, setting sequence over here, setting position over here, travel. Okay, that's how fast the sun travels its system. All right. And remember, moon is always on standby in that track locations. So you project the light, you project the dark. But you also have to understand if it rains by itself, you're not controlling it, you're just observing it. And when you're just observing it, you're watching everything. That's why I want you guys to indicate what observation is stay in that observation. You're looking at everything in that position. So when you start controlling the sun, the sun starts to recognize what you're doing. It sees what you're doing. It knows what you're seeing. So you're seeing what you want to see. In directions of line communication when it comes to frequencies. How you modify that is how you see the sun in all through traction. It's very complicated if you don't understand what it is in all levels of volumes of the simulation. Okay, that's just 1/3 graph of communications, what the sun is in line communications, guys. Okay. All right, so once we have direct and redirect, now we go in line centers. Okay, so we start position here, just 1 line signal. Okay, direct and redirect. So you start line connections of 0, set locations, take 2025. Okay, process lines, 25. Okay, time sequence is plus over negative. Okay, plus over negative, right? Because you have a battery line, process of positive, and process of negative. 2 battery switch line communication, right? Directing ground centers of flux line, course centers calculates lines of flux right through the signals and location setting attractions. Directing and calculate modify and line screen adaptation setting and process calculations. So what are we seeing through battery and line interference? The sun. How I see the sun is how you see your sun. So you can turn your sun into a battery. if it's turned into a battery, it's modified in line communications that's converted the system to its planet system of Mercury now. Okay, it's in Mercury, right? You turn your planet into Mercury. Mercury turned the planet into the sun. Sun turned Mercury into a planet. These are the things you can do. It's your mind that you come into wildness in that position, but you have to mind control everything you're doing. You can bring in Pluto and line connection setting its convergent system, right? The process now line conditions. Now Pluto is now the sun. Okay, it's not red, it's green. Doesn't have to be green, doesn't have to be red, it can be anything you want. Okay, it's how you decide how you want to see yourself and your mind imagination system all through travel. Okay, sunline sequence of 3 centers of travel, molecule design line, 3 centers of communications. Convergent system, all 3 settings, open window frames, sending clocking lines, screen adaptations of flux. Very complicated stuff, how you see the formation setting of the sun. Okay, all through travel. Directing ground centers of symbolism across the lines of angles, appear in the McAfee's lines of ground standard line communication convergence at 45 angles, in location setting and position lines of processing and calculations. All through travel. What do you see? What do you see in set positions? Right? A bike. It could be a motorcycle, a bike, whatever, right? So you got to be imagining lines of screen adaptation. Once you process that, then you bring in the light shades and shadows that gets in your communication and positions of balance. Knowing exactly where the light shades are coming from and set lines of travel and set communication. All through set position. Okay, rotate it, circulates, and goes around the same line direction, right? In set position, just operation lines to set track location. So it's very complicated if you understand how to use your sun and your moon in set positions all at once. Okay? So there's a lot going on, okay? I don't expect you to understand all of this, but I want you guys to understand what you're coming into as a higher lines of the mind line and how to process how to see the sun and the moon. So you got 2 factors over setting. Earth line is space. And you got 3 provisions of moons and top lines of space. Okay? Set lines of travel, 2 lines measure. Indicate here, triangulation. Process over here of indication. Right? Travel point lines, flux over screen, and 3 centers of travel. Directing lines, solar panels, solar generation lines, screen adaptation setting to flywheel in set position of 8 setting in the communication. Directing line, energetic dome line, and rotation lines of surface of travel. Directing ground centers, 144 flux, and communication lines of convergence system line calculations of crop circles over travel. Done through equation. All right? So now, you're in the 144 and 244, you got to turn your sun into a vehicle. You got to turn it into 144 flux. Okay? Now, that process indicates setting. That's right, guys. Set lines of Earth, habitations of 6, 4, 5, 6 locations, right? Okay, modify XT, 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 XT. Okay, so you have 144, outline signal, outline grounds, outline set line communication, capsule, design line, rotation lines of surface. Rotates the cycles, and then cross angles, line communications, positions. Then we get outside line, outside in of the sun, not inside out. So 6 habitations from inside out. Okay? The outline cycle, which is outer space, is outside in. They come outside in, not inside out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? So that's how it works in set positions. So once they create the 144 flux of a teleportation vessel, then they create their own portal. Then they create their own Stargate. So I'm just showing exactly how you see the convergence system, how you see the sun and the moon through the same clocking system of the same time and scale. Sets travels a point lines graph over 1, 6, 3, 8, and set position. Process indication over lines, outline, 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 and set lines of 6 lines of screen. Directing ground centers online sequence of panel of screen location system and adaptation. All through traction. Cloud changes and modification of high centers. Circulates and rotates the center line communication of its convergence system all through travel. Directing lines of ground lines, online sequence, online panel of convergence system all through calculations. All through the sun, all through the moon. Traveling all together in set tractions, right? So you have to understand that what's going on now in your sequence line is your sun and your moon that calculates to its new simulation, which is time framing your set line centers to your eternal beings of light that's going into the calculated modify. Travel point lines and graphs get you in a higher entry points that get you in positions. So the higher you go, the more you understand how to see the sun and the modification turn in its own teleportation, turn in its own portal, turn in its own Stargate. and measure and scale. Processing in the mind imagination setting puts everything all together in set lines of communications of panel operation. Okay? So we're good on that level in set lines of sequence. That's what you have to come in positions of now. To see the sun in a teleportation vessel. Okay? That's what it is. That's the new sun. That's the new moon. Turn it into a teleportation vessel. So once it works with you, you identify what it is. Then you can travel through the sun. And once you identify that, then you can travel through the moon. And once you identify that, then you can travel through its operation. And once you identify that, you can travel through its galaxies. Once you identify that, you can travel through its universe. You can travel through any locations. But you have to understand how to use mind and set lines of sequence to have mind control of what you're doing through imagination as you're using your power, intent, influence. That mind alterates everything that you're changing in frequencies, all through tractions. Okay? See you in 5.